Chapter 3 of Tractate Tanis begins with a Mishnah going through some unique variations on fast days. The previous points were on typical rain delays. In the event that the crops change, growing abnormally, we immediately do the full lengthy 7 fast day sequence, and this is also done if the first rains fall, but the second don't, as this will cause a food shortage. We also begin with the full sequence of fasts if rain fell for trees but not for crops, or vice versa, or if rain fell for trees and crops but not for water holes, ditches, and caves, or if a city was singled out without rain, they fast and cry out, and the surrounding cities do just a regular fast. Some say the surrounding cities cry out but don't fast. The same, and its argument applies by a city singled out with disease or a building collapse. Disease is considered that within a population of 500 able-bodied men, 3 people die once per day over 3 days. The following calamities, everywhere that hears about them cries out as they spread. Wind blasts, drought that causes grain to wither and yellow, a specific species of plant-devouring locusts, dangerous beasts that are attacking people, and invading armies. Some examples are given. There was a fast instituted for wind blasts the size of an oven's mouth, which will be explained, and for wolves in an area, some say that ate 2 kids. Others say they were just seen. Some negative events that we say the Anenu prayer even on Shabbos, a city being attacked by hostile non-Jewish people, a river that's threatening to flood, or a ship that's in danger of sinking. Some say we don't add the prayer, we only call for assistance. Some add disease into this list, others disagree. Basically, we cry out on behalf of a community for most calamities, besides for excessive rain. There's a famous story where there was no rain. So the people went to this sage, Chani Hamagil, Chani the circle maker, due to this story. So they asked him to pray, which he did, but there was no rain. So what he did was he went out, drew a circle in the ground around him, and said he would not leave it until the rain fell. So it began to rain a little, but he said that it wasn't as he requested. So it began to rain extremely hard, and he said, again, that's not what he requested. So the rain fell normally. They asked him later to pray for the rain to end, and he said he'd do that once a stone in the temple that served as the lost and found marker was covered with water. Anyways, the sage Shimon ben Shattach sent him a message saying that he would have excommunicated him for acting so bold towards God, but God fulfilled his request, so it was fine. If they start fasting from dawn and rain falls before sunrise, they can stop. If it's after sunrise, they fast for the rest of the day. Some say the line is between midday. There's a story like the view of the latter opinion. The Gemara is a source which says that we fast by the delay of the third rains. This is argued on further. The other points are argued on. There are similar points in crying out due to delayed rain. There's also a story where everybody went up to Jerusalem for the pilgrimage festival, but there was no water. So a very wealthy Jewish individual, Nakdimon ben Gurion, went to a Roman patrician and asked to be lent 12 wells of water to be repaid by a certain date. So it was agreed and the day arrived, but it still hadn't rained. So the patrician asked for the rain, or the money. So he told him the day isn't over yet. So this kept happening every hour, the patrician asking him for the rain or the money, and him telling him the day isn't over yet. And eventually the patrician just said that there's no rain all year. You really expect it to fall now? And then he went into a bathhouse. So Nakdimon went to the temple and prayed, and it rained so hard that it filled up all the wells. So they met up, and the patrician said, "Fine, you were right, but the rain fell after sunset." So Nakdimon went back to the temple, prayed again, and the sun shone through the clouds, showing that it was still day. It also says that the man's real name was Buni, but he was called Nakdimon, as that means to break through, like the sun did through the clouds. It also says that besides for Nakdimon ben Gurion, there were 2 others that the sun stood still for, Moshe and Yehoshua, by their wars, based on a verse. It also says several verses that seem to imply negatively about Jerusalem, but actually imply like a positive result, and similar. There's also a story that a person should always be flexible like a reed, as there was this one sage who was traveling after learning a lot, and he was very proud of himself, and an extremely ugly man walked past him and greeted him. So the sage called him very ugly, and asked if everybody from his city was that ugly. So the ugly man responded that he should ask his creator why he had been made this way. So the sage realized his wrongdoing and begged forgiveness, but the man said, "Not until you ask my creator why he was made this way." So the sage followed him all the way back to his city, begging forgiveness all the way, and eventually the people of the town told him he should forgive him as he's a great Torah scholar. So the ugly man said he'd forgive him for their sake, as long as he doesn't do this again. So it says you should be like a reed, so you don't say stuff like that. And it's in this merit that a reed was used as a pen to write a Torah scroll, to fill in, and mezuzahs. The point on buildings collapsing earlier was by sturdy buildings. This is discussed further, along with the point that there was this old, dilapidated wall that the sages wouldn't walk beneath, but they did whenever they were with this one great sage, Rav Ada bar Ava, who had great merit, so the wall wouldn't fall. There are other similar points, such as that someone did this with him and he got upset as he didn't like his merit being used for that, and you shouldn't rely on miracles. The great thing that the sage, Rav Ada bar Ahava, had done was that he never ever showed anger in his house, he never walked before somebody greater than him, he never thought Torah in a dirty alley, he never walked 4 cubits without wearing tefillin or studying Torah, he never slept in a study house, not even a nap, He never rejoiced when his fellows stumbled, and he never called people by their nickname, and some even say by their surname. It also says some other great actions by sages, such as Rav Huna, who would travel around every once in a while inspecting the walls, and if there was a dilapidated wall that the owner couldn't afford to repair, he'd pay for it. He also bought all the leftover produce from growers, so that way they would bring lots of it on Fridays, and then he threw them out and didn't give it to the poor, so that way they wouldn't rely on him and not have food for Shabbos. He didn't give it to animals because he held that human food shouldn't be given to animals. He would also give out free medicine to everybody, and some say he knew the ways of the demon Shifta, which attacks people who eat with unwashed hands. So he supplied water for hand washing. Also, whenever he ate bread, he would open his door and let anybody come in and eat. The sage Rava said he could keep all of these, beside for the last one, as his city had way too many poor people and he'd run out of food eventually. It says a story that there was these two sages, Reb Yochanan and Ilfa, and they had no money, so they decided to start a business, and they were walking past a wall, and Reb Yochanan heard two angels saying that they should push this wall on them, as they aren't learning Torah and doing business, but the second angel said no, because one of them will attain greatness. So Reb Yochanan left back to the school, and after a while Ilfa returned, and Reb Yochanan had become the head of the school, and he said that if he had stayed, it would have been Ilfa that would be the head of the school. Then Ilfa decided to demonstrate that he still knew a lot, so he balanced himself atop a shipmast and said that people should challenge him with questions, and if he couldn't answer them, he'd jump off into the ocean, and he was able to answer everything. There's yet another story about a sage named Nachum Ish Gamzu, who was totally blind, had no hands, legs, and was covered with boils, and he was lying in a dilapidated house on a bed with his legs placed in buckets of water so ants didn't crawl up on him. His students wanted to move him out, but he said to take out everything but him first, and when they eventually took him out, the building collapsed. So they said, "You're clearly very righteous. What happened to put you in this state?" So he said that once he was traveling with a bunch of food and drink, and a poor man asked him for food, so he told him to wait until he unloaded his donkey, and as he was halfway through doing that, the man died from hunger. So the sage prayed that he should become blind with no arms or legs and have boils because of what he had done. Also, the sage was called Nachum Ish Gamzu because he would always say, Gamzu L'Toiva, this too is for the best. There's a famous story about this where the Jewish people wanted to send a gift to the Caesar, so they asked Nachum Ish Gamzu to go, as he was accustomed to having miracles happen for him. So they filled a chest with gems and pearls and sent him with it. Along the way, he stayed at a place whose owners snuck on over to the chest, emptied it, and filled it with dirt. The next day, he saw the dirt, said, this too is for the best, and traveled on. It was brought to the Caesar, who was very upset when he opened it, thinking the Jews were mocking him. So Nachum said again, this too is for the best. So Eliyahu the prophet appeared as a Roman official and said, Avraham, the forefather, threw dirt and straw at his enemies, and it turned into swords and arrows to defeat them. So perhaps this is the same. So the Romans tested the dirt on a city they were unable to conquer, and they used the dirt, and it worked, and they conquered the city. So, as thanks, they filled up the chest with gems and pearls, and gave it to Nachum, and sent him away with great honor. Anyways, Nachum traveled back the same way, staying at the same place he had before, and told what had happened to his hosts, the men who had stolen from him. So they took all their dirt, brought it to the Caesar, and it didn't work, and they were executed. It further qualifies as what counts as a disease for this fasting severity. It gives some instances and discusses some similar points. It also says one town which was spared from plague, and the merit of a man who lent out his hoe and shovel for burials. Similarly, there was one town that was spared from fire, as there was a woman who heated her oven and let her neighbors use it. It further gives examples of when fasts were instituted. It also says that there was a surgeon named Abba, who merited to be greeted by the Heavenly Academy every day, as he would run his clinic in a very modest manner, and also he let people pay whatever they wanted, without him knowing, and he would never charge a Torah scholar, and would give them some coins as they left. Some sages wanted to test him, so they took his rugs, and the next day tried to sell them back to him, and he didn't accuse them of stealing, so they asked him what he had thought had happened, and he said that he assumed that somebody had been kidnapped and they needed to raise money to ransom the individual, but they were embarrassed to ask him. So they tried to return the rugs, but he didn't take them, saying that he had already assigned them to charity. A different sage, Abaya, received heavenly greetings every Shabbos Eve, and the sage Rafa received greetings once a year on Yom Kippur, so he was a bit distressed about this, but he was told it's enough that your city is protected through your merit. Another story, a sage met Eliyahu the prophet in a market and asked if there was anybody there who was worthy of the world to come. So Eliyahu said no, until one man walked by who wasn't dressed like a Jew, and Eliyahu said yes about that man. So the sage asked the man what he did, and the man said he'd speak to him tomorrow. So he met with him the next day, and the man said he's a prison guard, and he imprisons the men and women separately, and puts his bed between them so that way they don't do anything improper. He also said that he had saved a few Jewish girls. For instance, there was a betrothed young Jewish girl under his watch, and he saw some of the others villagers eyeing her improperly, so he threw some of his wine dregs on her lower dress and told the men that she was menstruating, so that way they'd leave her alone. He also said he wasn't dressed like a Jew, as he came and went amongst non-Jews, and it allowed him to hear what decrees were being passed, so he could go to the sages and have them pray for mercy, if necessary, which is actually why he had told him to hold off that previous day, as he'd been busy with that. Also, 2 brothers went to the market, and Elio the prophet said that they too had a share in the world to come. The sage asked what they did, and they said that they were jesters who cheered people up, and ended quarrels to make peace. It further goes through the list of other calamities that we cry out for, locusts and other bugs. Some say even if we see a single wing. A wild beast outbreak is if it's seen in the city, or by day, or chased 2 people, or tore 2 people apart instead of eating them, or if it climbs to a roof to take a baby from its cradle, even if it's in a hunter's hideout. It also qualifies if it's different combinations of these options. In regards to a war, this applies even if the army is just passing through. We cite verses about this from the incident when King Yoshiyahu, who went to war with the Egyptians, and says that he was shot with so many arrows that his body resembled a sieve. He was punished as he didn't consult with the prophet Yirmiyahu. It also says that as he died, Yirmiyahu listened to what he was saying in case it was improper, but he said that God was righteous and he had rebelled against him. So then Yirmiyahu eulogized him, which is all based on verses. The wind blasts refer to blight, which ruins grain, enough to fill the mouth of an oven. The exact amounts are unresolved. The wolves which ate those children, their excreted flesh was deemed ritually pure, but the bones were deemed ritually impure. The remaining points on fasting times for specific negative incidents are also qualified. Some other points on rain are said, like by the time of Herod and the building of the Second Temple, it only rained by night so people knew they were doing the work of heaven. It then repeats the entire story of Chani Hamagil that was said earlier with a few additional points. Another story about Chani Hamagil, he was distressed over a verse, when the Lord brought back those who returned to Zion, we were like those who dream. He asked, how is a 70-year exile comparable to a dream? So he was walking along and saw a man planting a carob tree. So he asked the man how long until it bears fruit, and the man said 70 years. So Chani asked, but you probably won't live that long? So the man answered that the same way his ancestors had planted carob trees for him, he would plant for his descendants. Anyways, Chani sat down to eat some bread and became tired and fell asleep. An outcropping of rock grew around him, hiding him from view, and he then slept for 70 years. He woke up and saw that a man was picking carobs from the fully grown tree. He asked, and it was the man's grandson. Also, Chani saw that his mare had given birth to generations of offspring, so he realized he had slept for 70 years. He went back to his home and asked if his son was alive. They said that Chani's son had passed, but his grandson was alive. He tried to tell people that he was Chani Hamagil, but nobody believed him. The sages didn't believe it was him either, so he prayed for God's mercy and he passed away. Rava said this is an example of the adage, either companionship or death. Also, Chani's grandson would pray for rain on request, and rain would fall. Once, 2 sages went to visit him, and a number of odd things occurred. First, he didn't greet them while he was working in a field. He carried his wood and hoe on one shoulder and his cloak on the other, while he walked home. He didn't wear shoes while he walked, but he did put them on while crossing a river. When he walked through thorns, he lifted up his clothes. When he reached his town, his wife greeted him, adorned. When they got to their house, his wife entered first, then him, and then he invited the 2 sages. He didn't offer the sages bread, and he gave his older child 1 bread and his younger 2. He then went with his wife prior to being asked, so they wouldn't take credit, to the roof to pray for rain. And the rain clouds came to the corner first where his wife was. With that done, the sages asked about all the odd things that had occurred, so he explained them all. He hadn't greeted them as he was working for somebody and being paid for his time, so he didn't want to waste any time by greeting people. He hadn't carried the wood on top of his cloak as it was a borrowed cloak that he didn't want to damage. He didn't wear shoes until the stream because only there could he not see where he was stepping. He had pulled up his clothes when walking through thorns as he could risk scratching his legs, which heal, but not tearing his garments. His wife greeted him so that he should have no desire to look at any other woman. He had his wife go in first because he didn't know the character of the people visiting him and he wanted to be safe. He hadn't offered them bread, as clearly there wasn't enough bread to go around, and if he offered it, it wouldn't have been accepted, so it would have been dishonest to offer. He gave the younger son bread as he was studying Torah all day, so he was hungrier. His wife's prayer for rain had been accepted first, either because when he gave charity, he gave money, but she gave ready-made food, or it's because there were some troublesome individuals in the community who were causing issues, so he prayed that they should die, but she prayed that they should repent, and they repented. Another grandson of Chani Hamagil, Hanan the Hidden, would also be asked for rain. They would send school children to ask him for rain, and he would pray in the merit of these children, who wouldn't differentiate between God who gives rain and him who cannot. He was called the Hidden, as he was very modest in the restroom. It further lists the differences between those who pray for rain in Babylon or Israel. There are more stories about sages who would pray for people to become wealthy or similar, and some students asked if they could become wise, but he said he could no longer do such a thing. There are a few more miscellaneous stories listed and more on praying for rain. There are more stories. One sage saw people in the market desperate for food, so he decided to pray for rain. So he took off a shoe and it began to rain, and he moved to take off the other shoe, and Eliyahu the prophet appeared and told him if he did, the world would be destroyed. It also said that a sage saw angels who resembled sailors unloading cargo of fine flour, so he told people to not eat it as it was from a miracle, which is best not to benefit from. And the next day, the normal wheat shipment arrived. There are more stories. One sage prayed because he had a dream which implied good things, as it says that King Shapur told the sage Rava to pray for rain, so Rava did it in a demanding manner and a ton of rain fell. But Rava's father appeared to him in a dream and told him that he shouldn't have prayed in such a manner, and he should change his sleeping place. He did, and the next morning he found slash marks from knives all over his original bed from demons. There are more incidents of prayer mentioned. It also says that there was a great sage, Rabbi Hanina ben Dosa, that a voice from heaven proclaimed every day that the world receives its sustenance in the merit of Hanina. He and his wife were very poor, so his wife would just put a smoke-causing substance in her oven so people would think they had food. They had this one neighbor who wanted to find out what was going on. So the neighbor knocked, and Rabbi Hanina's wife, embarrassed, hid in an inner chamber, and a miracle appeared and the oven appeared to be full of bread. So the neighbor called her out, saying that your bread's going to burn. So she said, yes, that's why I went to this inner chamber, to get a baker's shovel. Once, Rabbi Hanina's wife was upset over their poverty, so Rabbi Hanina prayed, and a hand appeared giving them the leg of a golden table. But Rabbi Hanina said that he had seen in a dream that the righteous eat from tables with 3 golden legs, and now ours will only have 2. So she said they should return it. So he prayed, and it was taken back. It says that the taking back of the leg was a greater miracle, as there's a tradition that things aren't taken back by heaven. Another story, Rabbi Hanina's daughter was sad on a Friday night, as she had lit Shabbos candles with vinegar instead of oil accidentally. So he said that the same way God had commanded oil to burn, he could make vinegar burn. The flame then burnt over the entire Shabbos until the Havdalah prayer. Another story, once people complained to Rabbi Hanina that his goats were damaging their fields, so he said if that's true, bears should eat them, but if not, the goats should come back in the evening carrying bears on their horns, and that's what happened. Another story, Rabbi Hanina's neighbor was building her house, but her beams were too short, so he said that the beams should grow longer, and they did. In regards to the goats that carry the bears, the way he had gotten the goats in the first place was someone once accidentally left chickens outside of Rabbi Hanina's house, so he found them and saved all of the eggs and chicks, and eventually he sold them all and bought goats. A while later, the original guy came back looking for his chickens. He provided a valid identifier, so Rabbi Hanina gave him the goats. There's also another story about a sage who fell asleep after bloodletting, and then had a conversation with God about heaven and reward. There are more points on praying for rain. There are further points on the declaration of fasts due to rain. One sage, Rabbah, said he saw the angel in charge of rain, Vidya, who resembles a calf with its lips parted and stands between the lower and upper deep waters and commands them. There are more instances of fast declarations. It goes through the procedure a bit more along with exceptions by certain cities. And that's the end of chapter 3.